So time now for our news review, where we take you through the morning papers. I'm joined by political editor for The Eye, Caroline Wheeler, and associate editor and columnist at the Financial Times, Stephen Bush. Welcome back to both of you. We're going to kick off with the front page of The Times, which focuses on, like, I think pretty much all the front pages, the local election results yesterday. Their headline, Labour's historic battering, and they really did have a battering yesterday.
They certainly did. And, I mean, the scale of the losses, I think, is one of the things that the papers are focusing on today. I mean, it's quite interesting, the different treatment of it, because some people are kind of sort of downplay some of those losses because actually the forecasts had been worse. They'd said, we were talking about this in the Green Room, weren't they? I mean, it had been the suggestion that they could have lost up to 2,000 seats, Labour, and actually the fact that they've only lost 1,300, some people are saying is something to be considered. But I think, you know, when there are bad expectations and actually they meet some of those bad expectations, 1,000 seats was considered to be a bad night, and we've already exceeded this. But when you look at the kind of smattering of the results, it's absolutely devastating for Labour. It's right in their heartlands. It's Wigan, it's Leeds, it's Birmingham, it's all of those big metropolitan cities, Sunderland, you know, all of those cities where we actually have often cabinet ministers representing them, have all suffered absolutely catastrophic losses, with seats going both to Reform and the Greens. So the other thing people are focused on is that this really does smack of a kind of shift in British politics, and the fact that we are now absolutely moving away from that two-party system, and people are basically rejecting the status quo and saying we want something different.
Well, yeah, and it is just not just the scale, isn't it, Stephen? It is where the losses are being felt in these heartlands, Wales being one of them, and we can pick up inside the Guardian. They've focused on Plaid Cymru's success. Labour falling well short in Wales. I mean, it's down to 9 seats. It's an extraordinary decline there.
Yeah, and we should, to be very clear, because of how Wales's new electoral system works, they came very close to not just finishing third, but not being in the Senedd at all. They've dominated Welsh politics for a century, with the exception of 2 European elections. They lost in 2009 and they lost in 2019 to UKIP and to Plaid Cymru, respectively. But this is a huge defeat for them, and although in some ways it's been a long time coming, I think every Welsh election I've covered, we've started with this idea of, OK, well, their record's not great. Is this going to be the time that they get got? But look, the thesis of the Keir Starmer project of the last 2 years was, look, we can painlessly trade some votes in our London heartlands like Hackney and Waltham Forest, and that will help us in our heartlands where we've been struggling, like Wales, like Barnsley, like Sunderland. What's actually happened? They lost Waltham Forest to the Greens, they lost Hackney to the Greens, they've lost Wales to Plaid Cymru, they've lost Barnsley to Reform and Sunderland to Reform. So it's actually been a complete, this is a complete disaster and a complete failure of everything that Keir Starmer has done and chosen to do over the last 2 years. And it really does put, we should be very clear, this isn't just a defeat which makes it look like the Labour Party might lose the next election. These are extinction-level bad results.
So you say it's an existential crisis for the party?
Yeah, if they can't turn it around, and that's also, I mean, Kevin Hollinreg was doing a very skillful job of making it look like, black is white and water flows uphill. But we should be very clear that the Conservatives are also in a similarly bad state and are similarly looking at extinction-level bad results.
Yeah, so let's take a look at some of the results inside at The Times, shall we, Caroline? They are talking about what it would mean at a general election, aren't they?
Yes, they are. They're looking at the kind of vote share, and actually what it tells us is that obviously Reform have done very well. They would be the largest party, but they wouldn't get an overall majority. And what they've crunched that down to, they've said that it would be Reform on 27% of the vote, with the Tories on 20% of the vote, and actually the Labour Party in third place on 15% of the vote. But not far behind them would be the Liberal Democrats and the Greens on 14% of the vote. So it shows you that the parties are quite close together. But there is one party that is storming away into the lead, and that is the Reform Party. And, I mean, let's just think about that really carefully. This is a Reform Party that has only a handful of MPs, and their fortunes would be transformed with over 280 MPs and a cabinet of people that we haven't yet met.
Yeah, I mean, it is extraordinary, their success. They have done incredibly well in a short space of time, haven't they, Stephen? But, you know, the critics are going to look at local elections and say, oh, everybody complains about the government at local elections. It's a time for a protest vote and it never translates to a general election. What do you think about reform when you apply that argument to it?
So there's a lot of truth in that. And we should also be clear that reform's performance in the projected national vote is not the level that an opposition would wish to have to feel confident that it had achieved escape velocity, as it were. Pretty much always, the governing party recovers in the run-up to the election. True, even when the governing party's gone down to huge defeats like Labour in 2010. Is that partly
because they do their more unpalatable policies?
They do the unpalatable stuff early, and also it's one of those things where political scientists they can tell that it's a thing that happens. We don't know a lot about why, but in pretty much every democracy, the governing party recovers, even when it goes on to lose pretty badly. In our country, the Labour Party always loses votes to its left in local elections because it's safe, right? Ultimately, if you voted Green or Lib Dem yesterday and you've woken up with a Reform councillor, you might be a bit disappointed, but you know that your services aren't going to fundamentally change. So the concern for Reform here still is, they fall back a bit when people are deciding elections. The left vote becomes more efficient because people are no longer thinking I'm voting with my heart. They're thinking who can win in my area. And I think they do really have big problems. One thing Conservatives did a pretty good job of doing is really hammering them on that 5 million donation that Nigel Farage isn't telling us about. And so you can see a situation where Reform might fall back. The flip side, of course, is they do have this perfect storm of a government that's failing, an opposition that is failing to check. I think the Conservatives are failing to convince anyone that they've changed, and a global backdrop which is going to be very difficult for all incumbent governments across the world.
Yes, it's going to be a really interesting couple of years. In the meantime, let's turn to the Financial Times. It's actually your paper, but I'm going to ask Caroline about it first. That's all right, Stephen. I just checked to see whether you'd written it. You hadn't, so that's OK, but we'll talk about it anyway. So the pressure then on Keir Starmer, I mean, there had been all sorts of talk that it could be as soon as this weekend that maybe he'd resign, or the pressure would be so intense on him from his MPs that he'd have to step down, even if he didn't want to. Where are we at as far as his position is concerned?
Well, it's a bit like a pressure cooker, I think. And, you know, yesterday afternoon, it was quite a slow burn. It seemed that people were being quite cautious about what they said. And then suddenly, about tea time, there was a smattering of MPs that kind of came out of the traps to say, actually, he should be setting out a timetable for his departure. For me, one of the most significant interventions was Louise Haigh. She, of course, is the former Transport Secretary. She's a Cabinet Minister. But more importantly than that, she's the co-chair of the influential soft left group, the Tribune Group, which actually brings with it about 100 MPs. And then after her sort of message, which was that this is catastrophic, that we need to sort of change course, that he should set out a timetable for his departure, a number of other MPs then followed that in what some people thought was a bit of a coordinated attempt by the backbenchers to apply pressure. I think it will be very telling today if that momentum continues and if we see more people coming out as some more of those results come out this morning. But look, he's made it very clear that he's going nowhere, Sir Keir Starmer. There's going to be a speech on Monday, which I think is going to be extremely important for him. There's people already saying that they will give him the benefit of the doubt. They will see what he has to say in that speech, and then they'll make their mind up then. But I think the other important factor is if anybody big goes over the top, if any of those big beasts go over the top. Now, we haven't heard from Angela Rayner yet. I think we might hear something from her either today or tomorrow. It'll be very interesting to see what her position is, given that her council was pretty much obliterated. Yeah. And, of course, everybody is waiting to hear what Andy Burnham says. He similarly has had a very bad set of election results in Manchester, which has led some people to think that it might actually have a cautionary impact on his leadership bid, because it may mean that there's less likely to be a kind of safe seat for him to run in should he find one vacant to give him a kind of return to Westminster. But I think this story's got a long way to go yet.
Yeah, what do you think about this potential push to get Keir Starmer to stand down, which he seems determined not to?
Well, it's very hard to remove a Labour leader if they don't want to go. Their rule book consciously makes the leader very hard to take a pop at. But I think what always happens with local elections in particular is that there are so many results coming in on the night, particularly on one like this where we also have devolved elections. And if you're an MP watching that, it's like, you become a bit punch drunk. You're like, ba-boom, 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 I can't follow these results. Then the next day you're reading the papers and you go, oh, Labour's been wiped out in Kirklees. Oh, Oh, we completely, almost, near obliterated, as Caroline says, in Thameside and Manchester. I think at that point, people start to go, oh, God, we've got to make a change. So it might not, it might not be this week, but look, we should be very clear, we are in the end game of the Starmer premiership. But we should also remember, as we saw with Theresa May, with Boris Johnson, prime ministers can be a long time in the dying. It isn't always a sort of Liz Truss, bam, and you're gone. But yeah, he's clearly in the terminal phase. OK, interesting. What might he do next? I mean, let's have a look at The Guardian, Caroline. There's an article here about pressure from Europe for the UK to is it actually rejoin the EU? Yeah, it's not just strengthen ties with Europe. Is that a kind of line that the government might choose to take in the hope of picking up some voters?
Yeah, so we're expecting, we think, that Sir Keir Starmer will touch on the European question when he does his speech on Monday. I mean, one of the issues that is definitely bubbling around Westminster is whether or not the government's done enough to win over its kind of progressive vote. And it wants a kind of big idea to sort of make sure that it wins the kind of left flank again. And certainly if you look at the position of the Liberal Democrats, for example, if you look at the position of the Greens, for example, they are all much more, well, perceived to be much more pro-European. So I think there is a lively debate, even in Cabinet, about whether or not this government is going further and faster enough in terms of creating that closer relationship with Europe, particularly given the economic benefits that it brings. And also, I guess, the international picture that we see and are faced with at the moment, given what's going on with the Strait of Hormuz, and actually, looking at it and thinking that we do need to be closer to our nearest European neighbours, which will give us a bit more stability.
Interesting stuff. You'll be both back in the next hour. Out of time for now. Thank you.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?